1,000 better
1,000
stories.
better stories.
1,000 better stories.
1,000 better stories.
Welcome to 1,000 Better Stories, the Scottish Communities Climate Action Network's podcast, sharing stories of community-led climate action in Scotland to help us all imagine a better and fairer future beyond the new normal and transform what we think is possible. Hello, it's Kaska, one of your story weavers. I welcome you to another crossover episode between our 1000 Better Stories blog and our podcast. Today, Joana Avi-Lorie interviews one of the mini grant-funded contributors to the blog, poet Jo Gilbert. As usual, you can find all the relevant links in the episode notes. We open with an excerpt from Jo's poem, read by Jo in beautiful Doric. They will close the episode with an English version of it. Enjoy.
Curiosity curbed by curbs, concrete and cement, tarred our earth, cut back connections, separate soul fae shore, soil fae skin, seal spirits and screens that lay about fit's happening. Demonise open air, dangers lurk out there, murder, wither, robbers, fraudsters, fakers, haters, killer, invaders, baby, beastie, winged or legged. A thing outside unplasticized polyvinyl chloride doors must die. Just watch nature fae inside. Yon old white man'll show you the great outdoors. A perty where bard fae.
Hi everyone, and welcome to 1,000 Better Stories podcast. My name is Joana Avi-Lorie. I'm Scan's story weaver together with Kaska Hempel, and today I'm going to be interviewing poet Jo Gilbert to talk about, the poem that she is publishing in our blog, 1,000 Better Stories, called No Nature to Nurture. I'm going to actually refer to the notes that I made when I heard Jo for the first time, and this was on the 22nd of November last year. So I went to this session at the Scottish Parliament here in Edinburgh called Poetry in Parliament. I had just arrived from Portugal that day, but I still wanted to go. So very tired with my suitcase, I went, and Jo's poetry was my absolute favorite from the night. And I made, a few notes. If we want people to care about things, then there must be a sense of belonging. That was the first thing that I wrote. And then there was a very powerful statement that was about being excluded from the gates of nature. I thought it would be quite good to bring Jo to talk on the podcast and to have her writing, her amazing writing, which is powerful and moving and also funny, which is something that you don't get when writing about climate change. I don't get funny stuff. And her poetry also made me laugh. Welcome, Jo.
Thank you. High praise indeed.
My favorite segment of the poem is precisely this: just watch nature from inside the BBC, and that old white man will show you the great outdoors, a party you're barred from. I thought this was very powerful, and it really highlights one's privilege when you realize something they've taken for granted, that you can appreciate nature, you have time and you have space to appreciate nature. I live here in Edinburgh, which is a beautiful city. I'm very grateful to be able to live here, to afford living here. So I'm going to have a baby in a few weeks, and thinking there's so many places where I've been before, where I lived or where I visited, where you have to walk for a great distance, or even taking a couple buses to go to a park or to go to what even resembles a forest. And you're just not going to do that with a small baby. And that definitely bars you from the party, bars you from caring, because you just don't see it. Could you tell us a little bit about your story? What drove you to write poetry? What did you want to write about at the start? And how did you then start writing about climate change, which is something that you've done quite recently?
Mm-hmm. Oh, there's not a kind of really short version of this. So I always say that poetry found me. Poetry found me and literally saved my life. And I know that sounds like quite twee, but it is the truth. I went back to university in a time of really deep grief. I'd lost my partner. I had moved back up from Glasgow and was sleeping on my mum's living room floor. And I was feeling quite sorry for myself and not really knowing what to do with my life. You know, I was nearly 40 and, you know, I'd kind of finished uni, hadn't got a job in Glasgow, came home, and I'd worked in PR and marketing because that's what my first degree was in. But really what I wanted to be doing was a writer. And so I kind of worked in all these project management for arts organisations and PR and marketing for arts organisations and third sector. But really what I wanted to be doing was writing the plays that were on the stage, not marketing them. But I didn't have the courage at that point and probably wasn't ready to make that leap of faith into another journey. And I had tried to do a master's up in Aberdeen working in self-funding, which don't do it because it was a ridiculously insane idea and I ended up dropping out after the first semester. Like I loved the time there, but it just wasn't feasible working and trying to study at the same time. Yeah. And then there was funding that came up for a course in Dundee. And so I'd kind of settled a wee bit in Aberdeen and I didn't want to move. So even though there were options for Edinburgh and Glasgow, I didn't want to move, and certainly not just for a year and then have to kind of start all over again. So I decided to do Dundee and I commuted. So that was basically what I spent the majority of my student loans. So I was still working, but just part-time. So I had enough to cover rent and things. And I got up at ridiculous times in the morning to get the train to Dundee for 9 o'clock. And I loved every minute of it. And so they introduced me to things and writers that I wouldn't have chosen to explore. And one of the revelations that came out of that course was that I could write the way that I speak. And I was like, Like, I didn't understand that you were allowed to do that, because of my whole life, I had half my family who are not from the country telling me, you know, it's not fit, it's what, and correcting me. And then the other half of my family speaking to me in broad Doric, but it was only acceptable to do that in certain spaces. I didn't realise that you were allowed to write and make art in it. So that kind of took me into the spoken word thing, and then spoken word took me into poetry. And I'd always had an intense dislike of nature and poetry. I used to say hatred, but I didn't really hate it. I couldn't get my head around it. I was like, another poem about bloody birds. You know, I didn't get it, because that had never been a part of my life. And so I didn't understand what the kind of big deal was until I was in this workshop and people were talking about, you know, different classes and being able-bodied, and how people who aren't privileged or able-bodied have greater barriers to accessing nature than other people. And the whole kind of workshop was around discussing this. And it was like a light bulb moment went off my head. And I'm like, that's what it is. I don't feel like that's my world. And therefore I can't write about it, you know. And it really kind of set me thinking. And so that poem that I'm publishing in the blog kind of came out of that workshop, and I'm making little forays into exploring other ideas, and I suppose having the courage to write about things as I see them. You know, I'm always kind of getting caught up in what I think you should be writing about, or how that particular thing should be written about, because there's, you know, bodies. I mean, there's how many poems about birds? What do I know about birds? But I kind of got a piece of advice really early on in my studying, and my tutor had said to me, you know, 20 people can write a poem about that chair, but only you will write your poem about that chair. And so I need to keep remembering that, and that, you know, when I'm writing that particular poem, I'm not speaking from every single working class perspective that ever existed in the world, because that might not be some people's experience, but it is mine. And by writing about mine, maybe other people will identify, or it might start off a conversation and say, well, it wasn't like that for me, but this is what I did, in that solutions, rather than just, getting caught up in the negative and, well, this is the way it's always been, therefore that's not necessarily true. These conversations can generate information sharing and problem solving and a whole range of voices that can kind of share their own experience to come together with something that can be then turned into action, or that's the way that I see it anyway.
I really like what you said there, about starting a conversation is not necessarily about agreeing, because when I heard your poetry, I was like, it was not like this for me, but I know some people that this was like for them, and even members of my family, and places where I've been that I thought, if I lived here, how would my life be? And would I be able to access these spaces and to care about the things that I care? And thinking like that, caring about climate change and doing work on climate change, even though it's something that brings me sadness and grief, of course, because it's something I wish I didn't have to do it. But at the same time, it is a privilege to be able to even think about it. What is, in your opinion, the power of poetry in creating, in this case, a specific awareness and engagement with climate action, understanding this as action that people can take and awareness that people have about the state of the world, the state of their communities, and what they can do to improve their lives. How do you think that the power of poetry can create awareness and engagement with both climate change and other social issues in the communities that are associated with the crisis?
I think, again, by having that range of diverse voices and experiences, for me, poetry is a very emotive thing, but a lot of that emotion comes from my connectedness to it. And so I think the better range and depth of voices possible, I don't know if it's because of my kind of background or if it's just a personality trait, but I don't like being told what to do. And when I was little, my dad used to do this reverse psychology thing on me, tell me to go and stick my fingers in the hole in the wall and here's a knife, go and stick that knife in there and switch it on. And if he'd said that, I wouldn't do it. But if he told me not to, I would have gone and done it, kind of thing. And I think that sometimes when you're trying to get people to take action, especially in that kind of context, it can come across as a bit preachy a little bit of the time. And I think that there's a lot of things that, in terms of working class people, are already doing that they don't actually realise. For example, we didn't have a car the whole time when I was growing up, and I hadn't been on a plane until I was 30 years old. So those things are huge, factors that contribute to your carbon footprint. So I think a lot of things that people are already not doing is probably not seen as doing something. Mm-hmm. And yeah. I think that would be a really good place to start. So, if you're already doing these things, and kind of make a list of things that maybe people are already doing without realizing it. And then saying, if you care enough about these issues and blah, 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 and you feel like you want to do more, then you can also do this. So it's not just a whole checklist of things. I think for me, when I was in that situation, I was working 4 jobs, I was trying to study, I had no time, I was sitting greeting and answering emails at 3:00 in the morning, why am I doing this to myself? And I still, at the end of all that, didn't have enough to pay my bills. And I'm not saying for a second that I'm in the worst kind of situation, because I'm not, but I understand how being in that situation makes you feel, where you're working, basically knocking your pan in, and it's not even covering what you need to go out. And then you've got somebody posh coming and telling you, oh, well, you need to do this and that. And it's, swear words which usually meet that kind of the last thing when you've got a never ending to-do list of things that you will never get checked off, or it feels like you will never get it checked off, is another list of things that's going to make your life more difficult, or you can't afford, which is the other part of it. You know, you kind of see things online about, oh, look, it's so simple. There's this meal and, you know, buy reduced noodles and this chicken and this da da da. It's like, aye, but where are you getting the money to shell out for all the herbs and spices to start off with? Because you're talking the guts of 70 quid before you even start for that. Where's that 70 quid coming from? You know, you're not counting the amount of electric it takes to cook it and blah, blah, blah. So there's all these kind of things. And I think, you know, starting small is always a good approach, and also acknowledging the things that people are already doing. So yeah, I don't know. I think I just went a bit soapbox there, but yeah, I think that does make a difference. And I think, you know, the most that I'm engaged with poetry is when it's real and it applies to me. You know, I can appreciate now, because I've studied it, and you know, I want to read more widely and things, you know, all this beautiful flowery language and stunning descriptions of things, but some of those things are things that I'm never going to see and have never experienced myself. And so, you know, I don't know, starting local is probably where I've gone, because it's the stuff that is closest to me. And so I've been doing like little recce's where I'll go and just sit in Duthie Park, or, you know, somewhere kind of local, some kind of green space. I did that a little bit in lockdown, where I would just write what I see, you know, and kind of start there before you sort of push out to national and global. And I mean, I know the issue is that, but sometimes you kind of need to start small before you can kind of mushroom out to the big picture. And I also think that tangible things, you know, are kind of more powerful. They do have that impact, and kind of, I suppose, one of the things in the past year or so is the what's the word I'm looking for? Just the absurdity, I think, in the weather. You know, I mean, this morning, for example, it's like, you know, 60-mile-an-hour winds. There's loads of places in the Shire with trees gone down. I mean, they've been battered, you know, this kind of winter by storms. And then the flip side of that is, there was one night I was out in November just before Christmas, and it was 17 degrees at night.
Yes.
And
yes, I remember. Aberdeen, it was like a Monday.
you know?
Yeah.
Like,
in Edinburgh was also.
That's not usual or typical weather. It's becoming something, you know, real even here. And I mean, I know there's much kind of worse effects going on globally, but local people are starting to sit up and take notice, and they're like, right, okay, this is not made up. This is not, you know, something that people have got nothing to worry about in their lives have made up. Because I think there was a little bit, and this is why there's so much climate deniers. You know, it's either because they don't believe it because they can't see it happening there, or it's against their business interests, which
it's again, or it impacts their lives. Like the policies start to impact their life before they see a direct impact of climate change. And I think that can also be a bit complicated. Like you see, for example, there's policies now to control car pollution with the ULEZ zones. And this is something that I've been witnessing and talked to some people, you know, who know that I work with community climate action, and my friends will kind of question this to me. They're like, I need to go to work. I cannot afford to take the bus or the train every day. That's not actually feasible to me. I need to take my car, and I cannot afford one of those cars. We sometimes are in a bit of a silo when we are talking about these things in policy without seeing how it actually impacts the lives of people. But just this idea that a few folk could be like, oh, now I'm priced of having a car. How am I going to go to work? So going back to the poetry, what has been generally the response from your audiences to these new themes in your work? And is there any particular story of a reaction or conversation that sparked from there that you would like to tell us?
Well, I think the whole poetry in Parliament thing, I think people that know my work would have been the last thing that they would have expected me to be doing was, an event about climate change, because previously, I mean, I have got poems about nature, and things that have been included, but it's not the main body of my work. And I think there are other poets and writers who've been doing this kind of thing much longer. So I was just as surprised, I think, as everybody else that I was included in that lineup. But it's kind of come from those workshops and that conversation, and being able to offer a different perspective, I suppose. And like we kind of, touched on before, when we have these different conversations and different people share their different experiences, it can only benefit, the kind of discussion that you're having. Whereas I think sometimes that if it's a particular issue, things tend to be in silos depending on your beliefs. And that's really limiting and restricting. And what happens in those situations is that it just keeps going round and round in this circle of madness, talking, and nothing ever gets done because there are no different voices to change it. I think it's really important to have all these different perspectives and have all these different conversations. When I was listening to people reading in that workshop, it was another revelation to me, part of my kind of own development. And because, I'm focusing that on more of my work, I'm being more aware of things that I'm doing at home and, trying to go to refilleries and buying, less plastic, and all of these kind of little changes, I think, make you feel like you're doing something, because the more I look into it, the more kind of depressing it gets, and I've been to various events and things and, had discussions over the years. And I think sometimes it just feels like we're banging our heads off a brick wall, and that it doesn't matter what we do, nothing's going to change it. We're set on this course and the experts are saying blah, blah, blah. And I think there's so much disinformation out there as well. Like I'm certainly not an expert on the topic of climate change. I know there are things that I do that make me feel like I'm making a wee bit difference, and that can kind of, lift the sort of doom perspective. But I think we also need to be a little bit lighthearted, although, some of the consequences are absolutely not, and there are parts of the issue and discussion that need to be taken seriously. I think there needs to be a little bit brevity as well to kind of push it out of that negative. Because a lot of people use that as an excuse not to do anything. Oh, well, we're all fucked anyway, so what's the point, and kind of pushing that blame. Why are they trying to push it back on ordinary people when it's big businesses that need to be doing X, Y, and Z? And, it's not, there's no cut and dry solutions here. But I think that having that, for me, using that wee bit humor in things just helps to lighten all of that a wee bit. And maybe kind of push forward into the more positive, solutions focused kind of way of things. I don't know.
I agree. A big part of my hope relies on that, as a writer and a reader as well. And thinking a lot, about also what am I going to tell my child, because they're going to grow up, and as I do my PhD on eco-anxiety and all these things, they're just gonna grow up around me talking about this stuff all the time, because I work from home and I have, just like I'm interviewing you now, if I was doing this, like in a year, my child might be just next to me there playing, doing something, and they would be listening to this. So yeah, like the way that I speak to this and the kind of things I show them, especially during these first years of life where they're not at school yet, I want to be really honest with that. And as a fiction writer, that is a bit of a problem sometimes. So yeah, definitely food for thought for me, how to be honest, whilst of course protecting, in this case, a child. And so, talking about, inspiration, could you tell us someone that has inspired you lately?
So I definitely think the person that led that workshop that we're chatting about, Katie Ailes, who is part of Loud Poets, was kind of part of my journey. But I've always had, despite my hatred of nature poetry, I've always really admired that there's a kind of way of writing about things that are beautiful, and you can see, even though you haven't been to that place. I think the best writing is the kind of writing that can make you picture it in your mind, even though you haven't been there yourself. And so I kind of really admire Jen Hadfield, who's a kind of English poet, now living in Scotland. She lives in Shetland. And I've always loved her really beautiful descriptions of very simple things. Like, she kind of transforms them in your mind. And one of her poems talks about this boat that's kind of rotting outside, which I think she ended up turning into a thing for growing plants, and it was called the Plinky Boat because it was all kind of broken up like this old piano, and that's what they call it. And I just thought that was such a great, because you can imagine it, just by that few simple words, the Plinky Boat. And I thought, yeah, this is brilliant. And although I don't understand it like in here, I can get it in here, and so I really admire a lot of her writing. And Pascal Petit as well. I was supposed to be going to Moniac Moor to do a workshop, but then COVID wrecked all of that, and it was put off, and then I ended up going to something else, and it still hasn't happened yet. So I'm kind of glad that I did swap it for something else. But just the way that they write, I just think is stunning. Alicia Pirahamed, who was at the Poetry in Parliament thing, Kathleen Jamie, there's tons. Katrina Naomi, who's also a kind of another sort of, you would almost say eco poet, but she writes a lot about nature and environment. And I always admire people. I would have said previously, I would have called them proper writers. And I want to be able to write like them. But there are tons of writers that I would love to be able to write like. But why would you be able to write like somebody else? Because it's not your voice. And I suppose I've kind of come to learn to kind of trust my own voice in things, but I've still got great admiration for those writers and to learn from them and aspire to be a better writer myself, I suppose.
So just one last question. What do you think that we can do, or that we can do more of, when we want to amplify different Scottish voices? And this is something we want to do with 1,000 Better Stories, the podcast and the blog through Scan. We want to reach folk who are often excluded from the conversation.
I think, most writers, if you're talking about writers, love a workshop. Yeah. And, I know some of my own people, Zoom has opened up whole new worlds for them. And I think that became really apparent in lockdown as well. Like my day job, we kind of work with people that are in wards for extended periods of time. And, we'd kind of connected with all these community groups. And usually if those events and arty things were face to face, they wouldn't be able to go because of access issues or carers, or, there's a whole kind of myriad of things. And so that having that access to online things was a total lifeline for them. So in some ways, their quality of lives improved by everything being online. And I think there was and still is a little bit of fear that there's not going to be that same provision. I mean, I know some kind of arts organisations and things have kept online access, especially festivals and things, which is brilliant. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that's definitely something to consider for people that can't physically be there. And then also the majority of big cities and things just weren't built for accessibility. I mean, I know there's improvements and, venues and places are doing things, but especially in poetry, because there's no money, I mean, I've done gigs in Edinburgh and it's up 3 flights of mad stairs that you just, if you were a disabled person and you wouldn't be able to go, being quite portly, I struggle to get to the top of some of these buildings,
absolutely. Yeah.
If there's no lift or any of that, I mean, I'm not claiming to be disabled, but, it's just not feasible for them to go. And so there's all these, I suppose, identifying the spaces where people are missing out and the circumstances providing places that are free or subsidised, which I know a lot of organisations are starting to do, but there should be standard, I think. It should become like, a bottom line that there's this many spaces for people, or we're going to do this online as well. So for accessibility reasons, or, it's always about money. I know a lot of the time, giving people money so they can hire spaces that are accessible for people. And the most important for, me and kind of working class people is paying people for their time as well. Yeah. Or at least providing some kind of incentive that is going to benefit them. Because if you're knackered and you're not getting anything out of it, then you're not going to bother, And so sometimes maybe there needs to be a little thought about that as well.
The workshops and the skill shares and training that we run at SCAN, we have been, thinking about how we can make them more accessible. There's always free tickets available. We've been thinking how we can make it more accessible and pay for carrying costs as well, for example, which I've found in writers' workshops that sometimes it's a barrier because a lot of people are like, okay, I'm not going to go to this workshop because I'm caring for a parent or spouse or children and I cannot pay for the care. So I can't go at this time. And if you pay them for the care for that day, then they can come. Yeah. And you're bringing a unique perspective for someone that would never be in the room. We're definitely going to keep thinking and embedding this in what we offer as SCAN to bring more people to our workshops. I wanted to thank you again so much for making the time to come here, for your contribution to 1,000 Better Stories, both the podcast and the blog. Thank you so much, Jo, for coming.
Thank you for having me.
So, No Nature to Nurture, the poem by Jo Gilbert, will be published in April on our blog, 1,000 Better Stories. So keep an eye out for it. Our mini grant, so our program of mini grants that supported the translation and reflection of this poem and this interview are hopefully going to open up soon. So keep an eye out for that. Keep checking our website. And if you have any ideas, send us an email and we will get back to you on that. And also come to our workshops. Tell us your ideas, propose things. We're doing this together. So, yeah.
Curiosity curbed by curbs, concrete and cement, tarred over earth, cut back connections, separate soul from shore, soil from skin, seal spirits and screens that lie about what's happening. Demonize open air, dangers lurk out there, murder, weather, robbers, fraudsters, fakers, haters, kill all invaders, be they furry, winged or legged. Anything outside unplasticized polyvinyl chloride doors must die. Just watch nature from inside. The BBC and that old white man will show you the great outdoors, a party you're barred from.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and maybe even a review. It will really help us reach a wider audience. If something exciting is happening in your own community, be sure to let us know so that we can help you tell your own story. Or maybe you would like to join our brand new Storyteller Collective. You can drop our Story Weavers a line at stories@scottishcommunitiescan.org.uk. To keep up to date, check out our website at scottishcommunities.org.uk or find us on Twitter, Facebook or Instagram, or simply sign up to the newsletter.